Black Arrow Industries, nothing to do with the Black Arrow rocket. It's just a name that Paul Williams at Black Arrow decided to use, and it's a cracking name. They've been looking at this for some time in terms of being able to launch rockets from ships. Now, this makes a lot of sense if you think about it, especially for an island nation like the UK, where at the moment, with what's happening in politics, and we go back to politics, it's a big story at the moment. Going back to politics, what's happening with potentially with Scotland in particular, with the Indy Ref 2 and the potential that Scotland could devolve within the next few years. This would leave the UK with almost no launch capability outside of Cornwall with Virgin Orbit. Because most of the launch sites at the moment are based up in Scotland. So this notion, and with Scotland, obviously, you've got quite a limited launch capability in that you can only really launch into polar and sun-synchronous orbits. Now, if you think about it, Cape Canaveral and Kourou and the major launch sites around the world all launch into what's called equatorial orbits, which is things like the International Space Station. Vast majority of satellites that are hovering above us, of the 4,500 that are above us, probably about 90% of them are in equatorial and kind of that are launched from an equatorial orbit. Polar and sun-synchronous orbits are useful if you want to do Earth observation and monitoring, where basically the satellite goes over the poles, sometimes staying permanently in sunlight, sometimes not. This is where sun-synchronous versus polar orbits come in. And effectively, the Earth's rotation underneath allows them to sweep over different parts of the ground. Now, this is useful for defense, for spy satellites, for Earth observation, for agriculture, all sorts of different reasons. Now, with China's a gigantic landmass, but their launch capability, typically they have got multiple launch sites, obviously inside the desert regions in China and some of the other CNSA controlled launch sites. But what they're thinking now with like sea-based launches is that they could effectively produce more or give themselves more launch capability. Now, if China are to be believed, and they're looking at things like these large constellations, and we're going to be talking a bit more about that with the Inmarsat report later, this will give them the capability and the scope to really develop multiple launch sites, so they could be lifting off with a much higher cadence or frequency than they are doing right now. The reason why it makes sense, over 70% of the Earth is covered in water anyway, and with ship stabilization, ship stability, etc. right now, this is more and more viable.